Hello, my dear bache. Today we are going to continue with the environment current affairs. It's not about the new species discovered. It is about environmental and ecology concerned with climate change and global negotiation. So I am going to explain about climate change and international convention, UNFCCC and COPS, mechanism, international treaties, international environmental governance and laws, few Indian policies like Wildlife Protection Act 1972, Biological Diversity Act 2002, Forest Right Acts 2006, and Environment Protection Act 1986. So these are I am going to complete this all in this video. Now I will upload about approximately 10 shorts. Based on that, I'm going to explain fundamental ecological concepts, ecosystem dynamics, trophic levels, food chain versus food webs, ecological pyramids, geochemical cycles, ecological interaction, adaptation and ecosystem, and biodiversity and species conservation, Indian flora and fauna, marine and coastal biodiversity, in situ versus ex situ conversation. So these I'm going to upload within 2 days, because Sundays you are going to appear on your dream job. So within 2 days, I'm going to upload approximately 25 to 30 shorts video to complete all the ecology and environment concepts. लेट्स कंटिन्यू मेरे प्यारे बच्चे. बेस्ट ऑफ लक, आपका ड्रीम जॉब आपको जरूर मिले. सो इंटरनेशनल क्लाइमेट, वी आर गोइंग टू लर्न अबाउट द इंटरनेशनल क्लाइमेट convention from the legal framework for global action against global warming. So ये rule किस लिए है? To greenhouse gas mitigation, adaptation and climate finance. It is managed primarily under the United Nations. So these treaties bring countries together to prevent dangerous human caused interference with the Earth's climate system. First one is the foundation, UNFCCC CCC 1992, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, was adopted at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. So I'm going to give everything in a crispy way, in short way, so that you can revise all the topics. I know you are knowing, but it is only for the revision purpose. So UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it serves as a parent treaty for all subsequent major climate agreements. Core objective to stabilize atmospheric greenhouse gas concentration, to prevent catastrophic dangerous climate destruction. Guiding principle, it is stabilize the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities, CBDR. So this dictates that while all nations must act and developed nation bear a high historical responsibility and must lead the effort. So membership, it has achieved near universal ratification with 198 parties. So members meet annually at the Conference of Parties COP to negotiate global targets. Second one is the first binding targets, Kyoto Protocol 1997. First one is the Foundation UNFCCC 1992. Second one is the first binding targets, Kyoto Protocol 1997. It operationalized the UNFCCC by committing industrialized nation to legally binding emission reduction targets. It is divided. It's divided nation into annex groups. It divided nations into annex groups, which is forcing developed countries to reduce emission, to cut emission, by leaving developing nation exempt from binding targets. It is leaving developing nation excluded from binding targets. Commitment period, the first phase ran from 2008 to 2012, and the second Doha Amendment extended from 2013 to 22. So second phase is Doha Amendment, which is extended from 2013 to 2020. So it is introduced early flexible economics tools like carbon emission trading and the Development Mechanism (CDM). So its impact was severely limited because the United States never ratified it, and major developing emitters had no binding obligation. Third one is the Universal Accord, that is the Paris Agreement 2015. The Paris Agreement replaced the Kyoto framework, creating a single comprehensive legal structure for all nations. So its goal is to commits to keeping global temperature rise global temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with a strict ambition to limit 1.5 degrees Celsius. Nationally determined contribution, every country must submit individual evolving national climate action plans outlining how they intend to cut emissions. The mechanism is a ratchet mechanism. It requires countries to update and submit increasingly ambitious nationally determined contribution every 5 years. A cyclical review process to assess collective global progress toward meeting the long-term temperature targets. So Universal Accord Paris Agreement 2015 replaced the Kyoto frameworks, creating a single comprehensive legal structure for all nation temperature goals, with a strict ambition to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Nationally determined contribution, outlining how they intend to cut emissions, a ratchet mechanism to countries to update and submit every 5 years NDC, and it's also assess collective global progress toward meeting the long-term temperature targets. Now the fourth one is the specialized and overlapping environmental treaties. While the UNFCCC handles overall climate change, other conventions regulate closely linked environmental issues. These other environmental issues, other convention are Montreal Protocol 1987, Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD), United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification (UNCD). So, the Protocol 1987 originally built to protect the ozone layer. So, Montreal Protocol, इसको याद कैसे रखना है? Montreal ozone layer को इसको protect करना है. So, it's Kigali Amendment. Montreal O से ozone layer and T से Kigali Amendment. Kigali Kigali Agreement. So, ओरिजिनली बिल्ड टू प्रोटेक्ट, मॉन्ट्रियल से इसका आ रहा है ओजोन लेयर को बिल्ड करना, प्रोटेक्ट करना है और इसके अमेंडमेंट को क्या कहा गया है? किगाली अमेंडमेंट 2016 में दिया है, विच इज एक्सप्लिसिटली टारगेट द फेज डाउन ऑफ किस चीज को? हाइड्रोफ्लोरोकार्बन, जो आपके फ्रीज में रेफ्रिजरेटर में यूज होता है. सो to reduce greenhouse gases emission. So Montreal Protocol to protect ozone layer, and that amendment is known as Kigali. Montreal है, Kigali है, Montreal Kigali, कारगिल करके याद रखिए. Montreal है, मॉनिटर कर रहा है कारगिल को. Kigali Amendment 2016, इस तरह से याद रखना है. Now Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD), ये CBD का फोकस क्या है? CBD कहता है कि इकोसिस्टम को प्रिजर्व करो, एंड नेचर बेस्ड सॉल्यूशन लो, जिससे कि कार्बन एमिशन जो है कम हो जाए. So Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD) focuses on preserving ecosystem and nature-based solution which act as a crucial carbon sinks. United Nations Convention to combat desertification चाहता कि जहाँ प्लांट की कटिंग नहीं हो, so addresses land degradation, सूखा नहीं हो, drought heavily increased by shifting global climate zones. Exacerbated means increase, aggravated. Now, how NDCs are legally tracked regarding climate finance pledges or the upcoming agenda for the next United Nations climate change conferences. So these are the question is how NDCs, just based on that MCQ will may come. So how NDCs are legally tracked regarding climate finance pledges or the upcoming agenda for the next United Nations climate change conferences. We have to legally track and mechanism of NDCs. So nationally determined contribution serve as a foundation for meeting the Paris Agreement objectives. So what is the Paris Agreement objective? To temperature goals, NDC, ratchet mechanism, global stock take. So NDC serves the foundation for meeting the Paris Agreement objectives, while countries design their own targets. Their accountability is enforced through a strict international tracking mechanism under the ETF is Enhanced Transparency Framework. So the NDC public registry managed by United Nations Climate Change Secretariats. Every submitted plan is published on NDC registry. So this transparent baseline prevents countries from secretly walking back on their targets. Now, second one is the biennial 2 years biennial transparency reports. Countries must legally submit comprehensive data logs tracking their actual to track their actual greenhouse gas emission, mitigation of action, and climate adaptation progress. Third one is the technical expert reviews are required. So submitted data undergoes an independent technical review. Experts flag this different types of discrepancies, double counting of carbon credits, or instances where emission reporting fail to follow international standard. Then next one is the global stock takes conducted every 5 years. This macro level mechanism assess collective global progress. So it evaluates if current aggregate NDC are sufficient to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius, and legally mandate that subsequent NDC set up in ambition. Second is the landscape of climate finance. Climate finance form the economic backbone of international treaties, ensuring developing economies have the capital to fund clean transition and withstand extreme weathers. So in this, we have it is taken into consider the new collective quantified goals. Second is the Green Climate Fund, upcoming United Climate Change conferences. So these are the points to support the landscape of climate finance. New climate collective quantified goal and NCQZ, replacing the historic $100 billion annual place. This modern framework focuses on scaling financial target into the trillions. So it balances funding between mitigation, building clean infrastructure, and adaptation. So building sea walls, reinforcing food system. So new collective quantified goal is to replace the historic $100 billion annual pledge. Second one is the Green Climate Fund, Green Climate Fund. So operating as the largest dedicated global fund, Green Climate Fund grants loans and equity investment directly into green tech and green. The loss of damage, and third one is the loss of damage fund. The loss and damage fund, it operationalized to address unavoidable impacts of global warming. So this fund collects capital from industrialized countries to compensate vulnerable nation experiencing immediate climate driven destruction. So new collective quantified goals. Second one is a green climate fund. Third one is a loss and damage fund. Now about the upcoming United Nations Change Conference, COPS international climate negotiation continue to repeat annually to update policy rules and verify climate progress, how the climate progress is taking place. So COP31, it's happened during 9 to 20 November 2026, convening in Antalya, Turkey. The UNFCCC COP31 feature a unique joint presidency partnership between Turkey and Australia. So the summit will heavily center on reviewing the implementation roadmap for NDC 3.0 plan submitted by member states. So COP31, the plan is NDC 3.0. 3.0 plan submitted by member states. COP32 November 2027 set to be hosted in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So it following the endorsement of African group. Endorsement had been done by the African group, the focal themes are expected to heavily prioritize climate financing adaptation, infrastructure and agriculture resilience tailored to the global south. So COP30 is the global south. Resilience tailored to the global south. Specific emission reduction required globally to meet the 1.5 degree Celsius limit. So global emission reduction for the 1.5 degree Celsius limit. So to stabilize the climate and avoid any catastrophic tipping point, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) outlined clear mathematical boundaries for global greenhouse gases reduction. The 45% milestone is global net anthropogenic CO2 emission must reduce by approximately 45% from 2000 level by 2030. The second one is the 2050 net zero target. CO2 emission must reach absolute net zero around 2050. So 2050 net zero target is a CO2 emission net zero around 2050. So any remaining industrial emission must be actively balanced by carbon dioxide removal technologies. So we have to adapt the carbon dioxide removal technologies. Non-CO2 reduction. So deep structural cuts the mandated for short-lived climate pollutants, methane and black carbon must drop 35% or more by 2050 relative to 2010 levels. Now next one is a gigaton cap. To prevent a gigaton cap is to prevent an atmospheric temperature overshoot. Total annual global emission must be throttled down to reduced down to 25 to 30 gigatons of CO2 equivalent to gigaton CO2 per year by 2030, virtually cutting present day emission GTCO2. Latest climate finance dispute is going on between the developed and developing nations. So climate finance disputes global north versus global south. So as nation negotiate under the new collective quantified goal NCQZ, deep geopolitical divide exists between developed economies and developing nations. So the quantum, how much the developing nation argue that the true climate transition and resilience costs sit in the trillions of dollars annually. So conversely, wealthier nations resist anchoring hard $1 trillion commitments into texts favoring lower baseline public funds paired with mobilized private capital. So the contributor base, who pays? The question arises: the historically developed countries hold the legal obligation to pay under the UNFCCC's historical responsibility principle. However, wealthier nations demand that high-emitting, rapidly growing emerging economies also contribute to the global funding pool. So, latest climate finance disputes, the quantum and the contribution base and the grant versus loan structures also there. The global south heavily demands finance via grants or highly concession non-debt equity to prevent compounding national debt crisis. The global north pushes for market rate loans, private investment and multilateral bank guarantees. Now we have to learn about the Paris Agreement, Article 6. Article 6 of Paris Agreement enables international cooperation. This is separate topic. I've included in this slide. So Article 6 of Paris Agreement enables international cooperation to tackle climate change and to unlock financial support for developing countries. So there are three components for Article 6 of Paris Agreement: Article 6.2, 6.4, 6.8. So 6.2 provides accounting and reporting guidelines for parties to use internationally transferred mitigation outcomes towards the nationally determined contribution and NDCs. Article 6.4 stabilizes a new UNFCCC mechanism which can use to trade high quality carbon credits. So 6.4 for to trade high quality carbon credit is new UNFCCC mechanism. 6.2 it provides a report guidance for parties to use internationally transferred mitigation outcomes toward their nationally determined NDCs. So 6.2 towards NDC NDCs and 6.4 carbon credits, a new UNFCCC mechanism. 6.8 provides opportunities for 6.8 for non-market based cooperation for enhancing for improving climate action. So the ground work for carbon markets and non-carbon market approaches laid out at COP26 in Glasgow continues to be fine-tuned. So this work is being done at annual meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement CMA and the biannual meeting of subsidiary body for scientific and technological advance SBSTA, as well as through inter-seasonal work in the case of Article 6.4 mechanism, also known as Paris Agreement crediting mechanism. It is operationalization is being progressed by the work of the mechanism supervisory body. So these are about the Article 6 of Paris Agreements, which is being done at a CMA and SBSTA. So timeline of key climate convention 1992 is a United Nations Frameworks Convention on Climate Change agrees to stabilize greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere. 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol commits to reduce greenhouse gas by 70% by 2012. 2000. Then next one is a 216 Paris Agreement commits to 2 degrees Celsius limit on global temperature increase. 2018 is Global Climate Action Committee allocates $4 billion to fight climate change over the next 5 years. So these are the timeline of key climate action 1992 to United Nations frameworks to establish greenhouse gases, concentration in the atmosphere. 1997 Kyoto, 97 is Kyoto 97 Kyoto Protocol to reduce greenhouse gas by 70% by 2012. 2016 is Paris Agreement, continue to 2 degrees Celsius limit on global temperature increase. Now 2018 is Global Climate Action, allocate $4 billion to fight climate change over next 5 years. So climate change is a long road of a Climate change is the long road of a global deal. So 2000, it's a number 32, December 31 Paris Climate Conference. These are all given about 1972 Stockholm United Nations Conference on the Environment, 1992 Earth Summit Rio de Janeiro, so United Nations Environment Treaty. So 1992 reduced greenhouse gas emission to 1990 levels, and annually since 1995 COP meetings annually negotiation to curb climate change. 1997 Kyoto, 1997 Kyoto, 1990 Kyoto. So rich nation agreed to cut emission to 5.2% below 1990 levels by 2012. 2007 in Bali. So Bali Action 7 is Bali. 7 है Bali. Bali Action Plan Guideline for reaching accord to extend the Kyoto Protocol after 2012. In 2009 is Copenhagen. Copenhagen 9 is Copenhagen. So talks on new climate treaty is 9 में fail कर गया. So but industrial countries placed to give poor nation $100 billion a year from 2020 to help adapt to climate change and to reduce climate disastrous events. 2011's Durban and Platform for Enhanced Action commits all states to reaching a legal accord to cut emission. 2014 Lima, so all nations are invited to submit voluntary nation pledges to cut greenhouse gas emission. 2015 COP21 Paris, so Paris Climate Conference aim is to universal agreement to cut emissions sufficiently to prevent Earth's temperature. So 2017 is a Stockholm, 1992 Earth Summit, Stock Summit annually, COP meetings annually, 1997 Kyoto, it is a Bali, 2000 Khoengams, 2011 Durban, 2014 Lima, 2015 Paris, SEA, KB, CD, LP. So which one is fail? The fail is the Fail one is a 2009 Copenhagen talks on a new climate treaty failed. So all poor nation to give $100 billion a year from 2020 to help to adapt to climate change. Now, the evolution of international climate diplomacy centered primarily around the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change (UNFCCC) at its legally binding treaties. So, key climate milestone convention and protocols 1997 we have seen. First World Climate Conference 1979, a serious international issue sparking early meteorological research and data sharing. It is the first major global gathering to acknowledge climate change in 1979. Then 1998, it is Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) established. 1988, IPCC established by World Meteorological Organization, the UNEP, to provide governments with peer-reviewed scientific, technical, and socio-economic assessment regarding climate change. 1992, Earth Summit, Rio de Janeiro. 92, Rio de Janeiro, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was formally opened for signature. So, formally opened for signature, it established the foundational overarching objective to establish greenhouse gas concentration and prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. There is no interference with the climate system, the human interference, that should be no. So this is the reason Earth's Summit, and also known as Rio de Janeiro, in 1992. 1995 first conference of the parties, COP1. 95. So, the held in Berlin, this convention marked the first formal gathering of UNFCCC signatories to negotiate and push for legally binding greenhouse gas emission limit for developed countries. 1997 7 is Kyoto, 7 Kyoto Protocol, COP3, called COP3, adopted in Kyoto, Japan. So this was the first international treaty setting legally binding absolute limits on greenhouse gas emission, specifically targeting industrial nations. It is entered into force in 2005. 2001 is known as a Marrakesh Accord, COP7, adapted the specific operational rules, compliance mechanism, and accounting guidelines required the implementation of Kyoto protocols. Then 2009 is known as a COP15, is Copenhagen Accords failed. This one while criticized for failing to give a binding global emission treaty. So this convention established the crucial political goal of limiting global temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius, and initiated pleas for the Green Climate Fund to support developing nation. 2010 is COP16. COP16 Cancun Agreement. 10C. COP16. So formally anchored the 2 degrees Celsius target into the United Nations process and officially established the Green Climate Fund to help poorer countries adapt to mitigate climate change. So 2010 is Cancun Agreement, COP16 called. So it is to mitigate climate change to help poorer countries. 2015 Paris Agreement 21, COP21. So 2015 Paris Agreement COP21 is a landmark global pact signed by the nearly 200 countries. So it shifted the international climate framework to a pledge-based system, urging nations to submit NDCs and committing signatories to holding the increase in the global average temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius while pursuing efforts to limit to 1.5 degrees Celsius. To 2015 Paris Agreement, also called COP21. So how many countries? 200 countries. So below the temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius limit to. 2021 is called Glasgow Climate Pact, COP26. 21G Glasgow Climates, called COP26, finalize the outstanding rule book for the Paris Agreement, including rules for international carbon markets, and explicitly pushed countries to freeze down unabated coal power and inefficient fossil fuels submittees. So explicitly push countries to phase down unweighted coal power and efficient fossil fuel subsidies. 2022 is known as a COP27 सर में सीख implementation plan 27 को सर में आ गया. So सर में सीख implementation plans 2022. So it's give a historic breakthrough convention to stabilize and operationalize a dedicated loss and damage fund to help vulnerable developing nations heavily impacted by severe climate disasters. 2022-2023 is you call UAE Consensus COP28. So it also operationalized the loss and damage fund and officially called on nation to transition away from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are coal, petroleum, natural gas. So transition away from fossil fuels in energy system in a just and equitable manner. So future and recent convention are 2025 COP30 Belém, Brazil, centered on enhanced scaled-up emission reduction pledges and establishing a new collective quantified goal for global climate finance. 2026 COP31 Antalya, Turkey, the 31st United Nations Climate Change Conference held from November 19 to 30 focuses on refining adaptation metrics and enforcing the transition plan set by previous climate pacts. So supporting global environment accords are the different accords are there. So while the UNFCCC governs climate change directly, related international treaties mitigate reduce ozone depletion and ecosystem destruction. They accelerate global environmental, but they improve global environmental degradation destruction. So few protocols are the Montreal Protocol given in 1987. It is widely considered the most successful environmental treaty. So it phased out ozone depleting substances. So it's known as the Kigali Amendment 2016 targets HFC directly avoiding up to 0.5% of global warming. So Montreal Protocol is known as the Kigali, Kargil करके याद रखना है. 2016 targets directly avoiding up to 0.5% of global warming. Next one is the CBD Convention on Biological Diversity, signed alongside the UNFCCC in 1992. CBD 1992. So it protects natural carbon sink like forest and peatlands by safeguarding global. Signed alongside the UNFCCC in 1992, it protects natural carbon sink. So CBD means to protect C. C means to protect natural carbon sink like forest and peatland by safeguarding global ecosystem. UNCD is the United Nations Convention to combat desertification. So stop cutting the trees. So it addresses land degradation and drought, critical issues amplified by shifting global temperatures. So these are about all the COP3 and COP7, 8, 13, 19, 18, 16, 15, 21, 26, 28, 27, all the UNFCCC Conference of Paris. So 20 COP27 surmise which we have learned, so it is given in an image. Now COP30 about COP30 delivered a new initiative, but it fell short on core demands. It feels short on core demands like the demands are fossil fuel phase out and scaled up climate finance, reflecting deep divides between developed and developing countries. So India used the platform to push equity, climate justice and finance as obligation rather than pleases. So while with major decision deferred, COP30 will be critical to convert commitments into credible action. What is the UNFCCC COP and why it is important? So it is important, it is supreme decision making the body of UNFCCC where the 190 parties meet annually to review climate progress, negotiate agreements, update commitments such as NDCs. What are the major unresolved issues at COP30? So COP30 failed to reach consensus on a roadmap for fossil fuel phase out despite a strong demand from vulnerable and developing countries. What was India's main demand on climate finance at COP30? So India with basic and LMDC demanded full implementation of Article 9.1, a clear definition of climate finance, grant-based and scaled-up support, mobilization of USD 1.3 trillion as per the Baku to Belém roadmap. Now, International Convention and Treaties, Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD focuses on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, convening Montreal targets and access and benefit sharing protocols, CITES understanding the appendices 1, 2, 3 and how they regulate the international trade of wild species. So, CITES means to regulate the international trade of business of wild species, CWs, wild species. UNFCCC conference focused strictly on India's updated NDC long-term low greenhouse gas emission development stages and global stock-take outcomes. So, CITES is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, Plant and Animal is an international agreement that regulates the cross-border trade of wild animals and plants. So, it categorizes thousands of species into 3 appendices based on their conservation status and the level of trade or regulation required. I'm not explaining anything. The thing is that you have very less time, so you have to just revise the topic. I know you all are knowing, just revise before giving examination, because environment demands 15 to 20 questions in your UPSC pre-exam 2026. 15 to 20 questions from environments. So, appendix, the treaty control international trade through a standardized permitting system. Every member country must designate management and scientific authorities to evaluate trade application and issue permits before specimens are imported or exported. So, appendix 1 is about the threatened with extinction. Appendix 2, vulnerable to trade. So, Appendix 1 is the lies include the world most endangered animals and plants, tigers, gorillas, and sea turtles are more endangered animals are going to be extinct, but not extincted, threatened with extinction. So, commercial trade in wild sources specimen is strictly prohibited. Trade is only permitted for exceptional non-commercial purposes such as scientific research or law enforcement. So, in these rare cases, both an import permit and export permit must be obtained or must be taken. Appendix 2 is related with the vulnerable to trade. So, this includes species that are not currently threatened with extinction but could become so if international trade is not strictly monitored and controlled. Example, corals and many orchids. So, vulnerable to trade are corals and many orchids. Points should be noted. It also includes look-alike species that closely resemble those already listed. Trade regulation is commercial trade is allowed but heavily regulated, and export permit is granted only if the scientific authority advises that the trade will not be determined to survival of the species and the management authority confirmed the specimen was legally acquired. The appendix 3 is nationally regulated, but so species in the appendix 3 are protected within the border at least one member country. So that country has requested the cooperation of other side partners to help control international trade in that specific species. So trade is tightly monitored but less restrictive globally than in other appendices. So trade requires either a CITES export permits if the specimen originates from the country that listed the species, or a certificate of origin from any other countries. So these are about the environment, more than treaties and environmental policies. So I will upload 1520s shorts video within 2 days that will help you to make your 15 or 20 question based on environment, and if possible I will upload science and technology shorts also. Best of luck my dear pyare bachche.